Hi, welcome to the 2021 virtual fundraiser for the Sejong Cultural Society. I'm Susanna Song, former reporter and anchor of CBS Chicago. We've got a great program ahead for you. We have special guests and musical performers. If you are a supporter and friend of the Sejong Cultural Society, you know all the wonderful work they've been doing for the past 17 years. If you're new, don't worry. We love to show and share all the good things they've been doing. Well, without further ado, let's take a look at all the wonderful programs and learn more about what this organization does.
Sejong Cultural Society is a non-profit organization based in Chicago, created by Korean immigrants in Chicago in 2003. Our mission is to advance awareness and understanding of Korea's cultural heritage among people in the U.S., to reach out to the young people through contemporary creative and fine arts using Western media, and to bring elements of Korean culture into the U.S. to enrich American culture. In 2013, we invited Mr. Lee Moon-yeol to Chicago. Mr. Lee is one of the greatest Korean authors of our time. He visited University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign for a Korean literature symposium, visited a high school in a Chicago suburb, and had a public talk show for the general public in Glenview. In 2014, the Poetry Foundation and Sejong Cultural Society collaborated to bring the internationally renowned poet Go-eun to Chicago. His poetry reading event was held at the Pritzker Auditorium of the Chicago Public Library. In 2014, we visited Korea with producers of WFMT, Chicago's classical music radio station. They interviewed 13 living Korean composers, and the program was aired in relevant tones of WFMT in January 2015. In 2019, we presented a concert, Sijo Poetry and Music, at a prestigious rush hour music concert series in downtown Chicago. At this concert, we featured Korean art songs with Sijo and classical music ensembles based on Sijo commissioned by us. We started the Sijo competition in 2008. The number of participants increased rapidly every year, from 140 in 2008 to 1,300 in 2014. Sijo submissions have been steady between 1,000 to 1,300 in the past 8 years from all across the USA and Canada. In response to popular demand, we just launched the first Sejong International Sijo competition in 2021. Poets from 19 countries, aged from 13 to 85 years, submitted Sijo written in English. To educate American youth about Sijo, we decided to teach teachers about writing Sijo and teaching Sijo, so they can teach Sijo in a school classroom. Since 2010, we've done workshops for teachers, presented Sijo lectures at national and state level conventions of teachers, such as the National Council of Teachers of English, Ohio State Council of Teachers of English and Language Arts, and many others. To increase interest in Sijo writing, we started Sijo and Music project in 2015. We commissioned hip-hop song artists to write Sijo hip-hop songs. Also, we commissioned a jazz ensemble and contemporary classical music ensembles based on Sijo. Then we organized concerts featuring Korean art songs with Sijo and commissioned music by us in the metropolitan Chicago area and Indiana. We've held music competitions annually since 2004 for pre-college students residing in the USA. There are piano and violin categories. The number of participants increased from 45 in 2004 to over 113 in recent years. In 2020, during the coronavirus pandemic, we changed the format to a virtual competition. 215 contestants from 30 states participated in this competition. Thus, we became a de facto national competition. We've held an international music composition competition known as the Sejong Prize competition 4 times. Our goal was to find talented composers who would compose music using Korean traditional musical themes. The Sejong Writing Competition essay category has been an annual event since 2006. Topics are Korean authors' short stories for adults and high school students, and Korean folktales for middle school students. They must write a short essay, less than 1,000 words, in response to prompts we provide. We hope to stimulate interest in Korean literary heritage among people in North America. The majority of our funds have come from individual donors. We've received grants from the Illinois Arts Council and several funding agencies from Korea. But those grants are usually designated to cover only a part of the project, and frequently they are given 1 or 2 years at the most. So it is very important for us to receive grassroots support from the community. We also appreciate talent donation. Thank you for your support.
As you just heard and saw, the Sejong Cultural Society does so much to make a difference when it comes to spreading Korean heritage and culture. If you'd like to make a donation, please do so. Any dollar amount will make a difference. Go to SejongCulturalSociety.org/donate, and as you can see at the bottom of your screen, there are other ways that you can donate. Just go to Venmo or PayPal. Our next speaker is Ambassador Kathleen Stevens. What an honor to have her here joining us. She served in Korea between 2008 and 2011. And believe it or not, she is the first woman and fluent Korean speaker to serve in that position. Let's hear from Kathleen Stevens.
안녕하십니까. I'm Kathy Stevens, and I'm really pleased to join all of you to talk about the work of the Sejong Cultural Society, which has been working now for more than a decade on its mission of promoting understanding through culture here in the United States, and particularly bringing in elements of Korean culture, traditional culture, matching it with our modern world, and really building a lot of bridges that way. This is a very personal thing to me. I grew up in the United States and first went to Korea as a young woman almost 50 years ago in the 1970s. I was a Peace Corps volunteer, and I found that not only was learning something about culture in its broadest sense was absolutely essential to living in Korea, to doing my work in Korea, it was also deeply, deeply satisfying and stimulating. And like so many Americans and others who discovered Korea whenever it was and whatever age they were, I came back to my home country, to the United States, with a lifelong interest in all things Korean. Of course, in the years since, Korea has blossomed in so many ways, economically, politically, and most especially culturally. And the other thing, of course, that has blossomed is the growth of the Korean American community here in the United States. So it really is wonderful to see the way that so many volunteers within the Korean American community and outside of it have come together to really look at and share the way that Korean culture itself continues to develop, to be influenced by its great history and past and by its new influences, whether we're talking about K-pop or K-drama or all the other K things that now populate our vocabulary. But I have to say, for me, as someone who first heard Sijo in the countryside of South Korea, but way back in the 1970s, I love seeing American children, whether they are of Korean descent or have no connection with Korea at all, learn about Sijo and write Sijo in English. I love seeing the way that old traditional Korean tunes are being reinterpreted by fresh young artists, again, whether they're of Korean background or discovering Korea through their Korean friends and in their communities. So thank you, Sejong Cultural Society, and all your volunteers, all your supporters for what you're doing. I know you have big plans for the future, and I hope we can all do everything we can to support it.
Well, thank you so much, Ambassador Stevens. Next up is an internationally renowned music group, Black Oak Ensemble. They have listeners and supporters from all over the world. We think you'll really enjoy this. Take a listen. Wow, what a spectacular performance. Thank you so much, Black Oak Ensemble. If you'd like to make a donation, we would so much appreciate it. There are 3 simple ways that you can do so. You can go to our website, you can Venmo or PayPal us. All that information you should find at the bottom of your screen. Well, last week I had a chance to sit down with a very popular YouTube influencer, Professor Mark Peterson. He is also a professor emeritus at Brigham Young University. And we talked all things Korean culture. He is actually fluent in Korean, and he had some things to talk about when it comes to BTS and K-pop. Take a listen.
Well, joining me today is Professor Mark Peterson as our special guest, and he recently accepted a position on the board at Sejong Cultural Society, but he is better known as an influencer of all things Korean. He has more than 100,000 followers on YouTube, and some of you might recognize his YouTube channel, The Frog Outside the Well. Hi there, Professor Peterson. So
Hi,
glad
Susanna.
to finally meet you.
Yes, it's nice to see you. I've been looking forward to this, and this, of course, is the annual great fundraiser and meeting for the Sejong Cultural Society, and I'm just really honored to be on the board. I've worked with them off and on for different seminars for the last 5 or 6 years, but now to be on the board is even better. You know, what I really like about it is working with Lucy Pak. Lucy is
She's a phenomenal woman.
She's off the charts. She's off the charts. And she does such wonderful work with the Sejong Cultural Society. And the board really backs her up and gives her new ideas and does this kind of fundraiser. So I hope this fundraiser is really successful and that a lot of people will chip in and help us to do our program for the coming year.
Yeah, what an awesome privilege for us to be participating in this fundraiser, because Sejong does so much in terms of forwarding and advancing Korean heritage across really North America, and now, frankly, with this digital world across the world, right? I am so interested in just your background, Professor Peterson, and I know you piqued so much interest from the family here at Sejong because not only of your profession and your professional background, but also this phenomenal YouTube channel. I'm curious, what inspired that name, The Frog Outside the Well?
Yeah. Well, you know, the old saying in Korean is from Chinese, and they use it in Japanese too, is if you criticize someone for having a narrow perspective, you say, you're like the frog in the well. And so I thought about, I'm looking at Korea differently, and I'd like Koreans to open up and look at their history in a more positive way. And so I thought, well, yeah, I'm like the frog outside the well. And that's a little bit snobbish, but nobody takes it that way. Nobody, I thought people might be offended to say, oh, we're in the well and you're outside the well. But people take it in a very friendly way, like I'm the foreigner, which is what I am. And I'm saying, hey, Korea, look at these things a little bit differently.
Yeah, you lived in Korea, right? You can speak Korean. 한국말 해요.
네, 한국어
That's
조금
my
해요. 네.
Korean right there. You also adopted 2 Korean girls, taught Korean history at BYU. So what sparked your interest in Korean culture? Take us back.
Well, it started when I was in the Army, but not in Korea. I was in the National Guard in Baltimore, and I met a guy who'd done a missionary work in Korea, and he told me about it. It sounded so fascinating. So I applied, and I was a missionary in Korea for 2.5 years. And then I went back as a student. Then I took my wife back and studied for my PhD. And then I got a job. I was the director of the Fulbright program for 7 years. And that was a lot of fun. And then I got my job at BYU teaching. And in the meantime, I traveled to Korea a lot. Before the COVID, 2019, I had 8 trips in 1 year. It was amazing.
So you speak in Korean when you give those lectures?
Most of the lectures are in Korean. Some are in English. Most are in Korean. Yeah.
So, you know, what about Korean culture attracts you, and in your opinion, really non-Koreans? Like, what about it that has kind of brought you back so many times to Korea, and then, you know, really kind of broadened your interest in, like you said, the history and, you know, various things like even social media?
There are 2 primary things that caught my interest in the first place. One was the Korean family system. The Korean family seems so strong and so tight, and such strong bonds between parent and child. And then the second thing was education. Korea has an extraordinary interest in getting their children educated. perhaps more than any other country in the world. And it goes back to the old kwagochedo of taking the exams to get a government position. And today, too, students are just crazy in cramming for the exam. And so the educational system of Korea really fascinated me. It's a little bit overboard, frankly. It's a little bit overboard, but still the way they consider education so important. You know, Korea is called the economic miracle. But my old friend Horace Underwood, who was the grandson of the founder of Yonsei University, he used to say the education miracle preceded the economic miracle. So that's been the two driving forces to understand why and how the family operates, and then why and how this drive for education operates. Those are the things that got me started.
Yeah, I actually, as a former journalist, I traveled to South Korea as a fellow, and one of the things that caught my attention was when a diplomat said that Korea is the only country in the world to date that was ever a developing country or third world country that now has become a donor country. So we came out of poverty and now we are donating to developing countries.
Well, that's another thing I saw. When I first went to Korea in 1965, the development after the war was still very, very slow. Per capita income in Korea that year was $125 per person per year. Just absolute grinding poverty. And yet the people had such optimism and such hope for the future. It was just inspiring. And I knew at that time in 1965 that in 2021, Gangnam would look like Gangnam, that Korea would develop the way they've developed.
Oh, wow. Yeah, I visited Gangnam, and you almost feel like you're in, you know, like New York or Chicago. It's just a thriving area of Seoul.
Well, Gangnam is nicer than New York. Gangnam is nicer than Park Avenue or Fifth Avenue.
Yeah.
It's newer, it's shinier, it's brighter, and it's more upbeat. So Korea has really come a long way from one of the poorest countries in the world to really one of the richest countries. It's rated number 12 or number 10, depending on how you count it. So it's just marvelous. It's just marvelous what Korea has done.
For those of you who have just come across Sejong Cultural Society, I just want to give a little background, and you can fill in the gaps as well, Professor Peterson. But it was formed back in 2003 by the Seoul National University Alumni Association. It's headquartered in a suburb of Chicago, and it's intended to, as I mentioned earlier in the segment, to advance awareness and understanding of Korea's cultural heritage through contemporary creative and fine arts. And really, the organization is known to provide numerous writing and music programs, but more specifically, Sejong hosts a Sijo competition as well as a music competition every year. Mark, what can you tell us about Sijo and why that's gaining so much interest?
Sijo has really captured my interest, and that's what brought me to the Sejong Cultural Society, is their Sijo contest. And I just really think that's a wonderful thing. And it has grown and grown. And as I was teaching Korean literature in my classes, I would very often, when we got to Sijo, I would ask students if they knew haiku. All American students know haiku. They've written haiku. When I first started teaching at the university, I'd ask about haiku, and students had studied it in high school. Later, I found they were studying it in junior high. Later, now more recently, students study haiku in 3rd or 4th grade. And they not only study haiku, they just don't look at the masters that were written years ago. They write haiku. It's a creative exercise. And so, in Korea, there's this saying about your cousin bought some land and I got a stomachache. My cousin bought some land and I got a stomachache. I was so jealous. I'm jealous of haiku. I hate to admit it, but I would like to see Sijo become as popular and as pervasive in all aspects of American society as haiku. And because haiku has become that successful, there's no reason in the world why Sijo cannot as well. And we're starting to get there. Sijo is starting to spread around the United States.
And a lot of that expansion has to do with Sejong Cultural Society. I hear that Wisconsin held a state Sijo contest that Sejong Cultural Society helped with. How has this organization been kind of that impetus and that aid to bring awareness of Sijo across the country?
Yes. Yeah, Sejong has done the most important work in spreading the word about Sijo. And it's spread to Wisconsin because we have a very good teacher of Sijo whose students win first, second, third, or honorable mention every year in Wisconsin. And she's been a driving force to have the Sijo contest in Wisconsin. But we've also had a contest in LA with the LA Cultural Society. We've had one in Ohio at Ohio State University. And I'm trying to get one started here in Utah with cooperation of the Utah Educational Organization. So yeah, it's starting to spread. And it all started with Sejong, with the Sejong Cultural Society.
Yeah, and we're in 2006, non-Koreans comprised of just 25% of participants, but this year, non-Koreans comprise 97%. That is a huge jump.
Yes, this Sijo contest, I think when the Sejong Cultural Society envisioned Sijo, they saw it as an event for Korean American students, but it quickly has spread to become not just Korean American students, but 97% ordinary Americans. And the winners each year, they have names like Smith, Johnson, Rodriguez, and Chang. And Chow, some Chinese Americans have been winning the contest recently.
That is awesome. Let's go ahead and hear from this year's Sijo winner.
Yes.
Here's my Sijo. Downsizing. That sweater, so warm and soft, yet full of holes, hangs unworn. Let's toss it. Downsizing means tough decisions. No one wears it. Wait, I cry. Grandma made that when I was young. It still fits.
Well, that was beautiful, Professor Peterson. What did you think of it? I know you've probably heard so many and you helped judge, but what did you think about this year's winner?
I was the judge for this year, for this one, and I really enjoyed that. I thought it really captured sentiment. And to me, the thing about Sijo is it has to capture an emotion or it just doesn't work. And the emotion could be humor. There's a great Sijo in the Wisconsin contest about consider the frog, be contemplative. I should read it off, but he says, consider the frog, be contemplative and restful, and then catch the fly, but then feel free to spit out the fly. So it's had this humor to it. But the one by Alice Davidson that we just listened to, the warmth of that sweater, and let's throw it out, we have to downsize, but no, it still fits. And I asked Alice if there really is a sweater, and she said no, it's all in her imagination. But it seems so real, and we all have that kind of feeling. We have to throw out things, but no, don't throw that out. It still fits. Grandmother made it for me. It's just a wonderful sentiment.
Sejong offers other contests and programs. We'll hear from the musicians in a bit, but I do want to hear more about your take, Professor Peterson, on how the world has embraced Korean music, dramas, and culture, from BTS to, barbecue. Almost every major city now has Korean barbecue. So I'm curious, with your decades of Korean interest, studies, what surprises you the most about this specific and sudden kind of draw to all things Korean?
I'd like to sit back and say, I saw it all coming and I'm not surprised, but that's not true. I am surprised. I am really surprised by BTS. Several years ago, our enrollments at the university started to grow in Korean enrollments. It used to be our 101 class, we had to beg the administration to hold the class because we needed 20 students and we only had 12, we only had 10, but we'd beg and the administration would say, oh, okay, you need it to get started. But now, well, gradually back then we had 2 sections. We had 40 students, then we had 60 students, then we had 80 students. Now we've got 120 students in the first year class. So we got 5 or 6 sections of 101. What's made the difference? It's been K-pop. Korean or American kids watching K-pop music, watching K-pop drama, Crash Landing on You, watching K-pop movies. And that these kids want to learn Korean. And it's just amazing. So when I first saw this happening, I thought, I've got to look into K-pop. So I looked at the music, and the popular group then was Sonyeoshide, the SNSD, these young women singers. And I watched a couple of them. I just fell in love with them. It was so attractive, and it was moving, and it was good music. It was really interesting. And so I thought, oh, this is not temporary. This is not some passing fad. This thing's going to hold on. And now Sonyeoshide is still out there, but Blackpink has become very, very popular. And then, of course, BTS is just off the charts. They've played on every American late night show, and they're very, very popular. So it's an amazing thing to see. Zupa's, the food chain, recently has a bulgogi sandwich. So it's going everywhere, as you mentioned. Yes.
Yeah, that is something else. Everyone knows about BTS. It used to be, some of those K-pop bands or groups, people who are interested in K-pop would know of them, but now it's mainstream. I mean, if you don't know a BTS song, then like, where have you been?
When you were a little girl, Korea was not cool, and people didn't have a good impression of Korea. MASH was the TV show, of poor, war-torn country that went from that image in a matter of like 30 years to becoming really cool. I mean, Korean is so cool these days, and people want to go to Korea. People want Korean food. They like Korean music. They love Korean movies. And Parasite got the Academy Award for the Best Picture of the Year. Unbelievable.
Yeah, all of that, there's a foundation to it. And to me, that's the beauty of Sejong Cultural Society, because it's all about educating people. Like, where did that come from? What are the roots? What's the history? Yeah. So again, for those of you who are watching, who are listening, the society, the Cultural Society needs donations in order to keep running, right?
I really love the Sejong Cultural Society. I've done a lot of work with the Korea Society in New York, and they used to do a lot of education. That's when I was involved. Then they got a new director, and he shifted toward politics and economics. And there are lots of ways to study a culture and to study a country. And the Korea Society has gone economics and politics, and not much education, not much culture. The Sejong Cultural Society is not doing politics. It's not doing economics. It's not doing economic development. It's doing culture. Pure culture. And it's doing a great job. So I hope our listeners will help us out and help us fill our budget. The bigger budget we have, the better work we can do. So chip in, and let's make Sejong Cultural Society even more prosperous than it has been in the past.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Professor Mark Peterson. Thank you for your time, and of course, your contribution to Sejong Cultural Society.
Thank you, Susanna. It's really been a pleasure talking with you.
What a fascinating interview with Professor Peterson. Thank you so much for all of your insight. Well, you heard from this year's Sijo winner. We also have other past Sijo winners who are educators now, who wanted to contribute to this program because they're taking their lessons learned from Sijo competition and now applying it to their teaching curriculum. Let's hear from them.
Hi, I'm Alice Davidson, a teacher of world history in Houston, Texas. The Sejong Cultural Society has provided innumerable opportunities for me, other teachers, and students to learn about Korean culture and history. I learned about Sijo from Dr. Park at the Los Angeles Korean Cultural Seminar for Teachers, and then took an online class from Sejong Cultural Society. During those experiences, I wrote a few Sijo and entered one of mine into the competition, which I then won. Sijo is an excellent way to expose my world history students to more than just the facts of Korean history. I let them read some Sijo and learn the basic syllable pattern. Then I have them use Sijo to make some historical review information. When they study for the unit test, they write a Sijo, which includes information that they want to remember. It's a fun and interesting way for them to be exposed to this style of poetry. I've also told many of my colleagues about the Sejong Cultural Society lessons for teachers, and several of them have taken the Sijo class. The creative writing teacher here at my school has added a section on Sijo to her poetry unit. I heartily recommend the Sejong Cultural Society for your support. Please give generously to support this excellent resource. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Nia Gipson, and I am a high school science and engineering teacher in Boston, Massachusetts. The reason that I decided to take the Korean Sijo workshop this summer is because despite the fact that I'm not in the humanities, like history or in English language arts, I do teach a lot of students from East Asia, in particular Korea, and I wanted to really fortify my own knowledge about the culture and the heritage where my students come from. So when I saw the opportunity to do the Sijo workshop, I was really excited to explore this particular art form that I didn't know that much about. So as a result of the workshop, I was able to write my own Sijo, which I really enjoyed, and I was able to connect it to the content that I actually teach in my classroom. As a science teacher, in particular an environmental science teacher, I'm really interested in the natural world. And as part of kind of learning more about Korea, I stumbled upon this fact that the demilitarized zone between North and South Korea, in the wake of the sort of pseudo-peace treaty that has been established, has actually turned into an impromptu wildlife refuge. So I would like to share that story with my environmental science students and then challenge them to write their own Sijo in response to what it is that we learned and discussed and talked about. And this would give me an opportunity to introduce South Korea to some of my domestic students who maybe don't know too much about South Korea or the Korean War and kind of the result of that. And they can reflect upon that and then write their own Sijo for themselves. So now I'm going to share my Sijo with you, the one that I was able to write at the end of the workshop that I did this summer. And I think of this as sort of an untitled poem, but you can definitely connect it with the DMZ. So here we go. The tangled wire snarls a red scar across the heart of a nation. Festering feelings of loss, a connection I never knew. In shadows, life thrums a new beat, turning red ichor into green.
Thanks, Alice and Nia, for those kind words. Well, in addition to the Sijo competition, the Sejong Cultural Society also has a music competition. So contestants are required to play a short piece with Korean-themed music. We have many past performances that were amazing, and we'd love to share them with you.
Hi, I'm Rachel Barton Pine, and I want to really thank the Sejong Music Competition for providing so many opportunities for music students to learn beautiful pieces by Korean composers. It's so important for all of our children to learn that classical music is for everyone and by everyone. I've personally particularly enjoyed bringing some of the fun arrangements of Ari Rang with me as I tour around the country and do community engagement at elementary schools and middle schools. It's especially fun when there are Korean children in the audience and they recognize a tune they know and get to hear it in a fancy violin version.
Hi, my name is Sylvia, and the thing that I love the most about Sejong is that many of the pieces are by women composers.
Thanks again for all of your great work, and thanks for being part of the musical and educational landscape of Chicago.
And I currently study with Ida Kavafian at the Curtis Institute of Music. This year I'll be auditioning for my master's, and I'll be participating in the Isang Yoon Violin competition in October. And when I was in high school, I competed in the Sejong music competition. I believe my first year was in 2010, and I participated every year until 2015. And Sejong was just an incredible way for me to set up goals every year, and it pushed me to get my repertoire to a higher level than the year before. And because so many of my friends and my peers also competed, it was a very healthy source of competition that always pushed me to achieve a higher level. And one part that I will always remember about the competition was the required piece. We had to learn a Korean piece every year. And being half Korean, I always enjoyed that part because it was very different than playing something out of the normal standard canon, but it was also one of the first times that I had ever played a piece by someone of my own heritage. And looking back, I think it was so important having this competition in my development as an artist, and I know so many of my friends that say the same, and I sincerely hope that they're able to keep going so that it may continue to inspire other young musicians like it did me.
Imagine combining Sijo with hip hop. Well, that's what's happening right now. The Sejong Cultural Society, wanting to appeal to the younger generation, commissioned Elephant Rebellion, a very popular, well-known Chicago music group, to perform Be Here, which is based on a 16th century Sijo.
명월이 편산하니 쉬어간들 어떠리.
So many ladies intrigued by my play, consume energy with desire to stay. You might give it too much choice to make. But with Lady Blue, the choice is too late. Shorty had my heart from the start. With a glance, we dance to the rhythm of J Blue. You want me to stay, but I play with your ocean. Thinking I can lay in the shade of your thoughts.
The Sejong Cultural Society does such a tremendous job spreading Korean heritage and culture, and we want to see this effort continue to thrive, but they need your donations. Please donate 3 ways, either via website, Venmo, or PayPal. Please do not delay. Again, every dollar will make a difference. And before we end this program, I want to thank you for joining us and for listening and caring for this cause. I'd like to leave you with Black Oak Ensemble and their song, Libertango.
Sejong.